So hello everyone, welcome to another Friday Discovery session. I'm Natalie, Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. Thanks for joining us on this, hopefully you have sun as well, Friday. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly go over the webinar format. Our guest speaker, Corey Diamond, will present for approximately 20 minutes before we open up the floor to questions and a general community discussion for approximately 20 minutes as well. If you've attended before, you know that we have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 Eastern Time so that everyone can get out and enjoy the rest of their day. A reminder that during the discussion period, there are two ways to ask questions. One is at the bottom of the Zoom session, you have a Q&A box. You can type your question in there. Another one is to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. The only rule that we have is the same one we have for all our presenters is no sales pitches, please. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce you our Executive Director, Corey Diamond, who is going to give an update on energy efficiency's role in Canada's economic recovery, including an overview of conversations we've had across Canada, what we're hearing in Ottawa, and how you can take part. Our Director of Policy, Brendan Haley, will then join us as we open the floor to community discussion. So thanks for joining us, Corey.
Thank you, Nat. That was great. You're a real pro at these intros now. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking your lunch break if you're on the East Coast or Central, and for starting your day with us if you're on the West Coast. So I really wanted to give an update to everyone as much as we could on what's happening around energy efficiency and Canada's economic recovery. As many of you know, we've been hard at work on this since pretty much right at the beginning of the lockdown. We kind of reoriented our entire organization to focus as much as we could on this. And I think it's time that we could provide an update to you on what we've been up to, but also what we're hearing in Ottawa, and then end off with just some things that you could do as well to kind of help push the needle on this. So as we think of this, we started to kind of apply our theory of change as we do with everything. So if you're not familiar with the work that Efficiency Canada does, there are kind of three pillars to everything that we do. The first is our research and policy analysis. The second is our communications efforts to kind of tell the story of energy efficiency and how it's a huge part of Canada's transition to a zero emissions future. And then the third part is our engagement strategy to organize and mobilize the energy efficiency sector across the country. So as we started to orient our work towards economic recovery, all we did was apply this lens to that work and started to unleash the various different factions of our organization to talk about it. So I'm gonna kind of frame this presentation in that way, and you kind of understand and see kind of activities that we've undertaken so far. So the first is in our research and policy analysis. This kind of all happened in real time. Normally we have the luxury of stepping back, doing the right research, understanding and speaking to as many stakeholders as we can. But as you can imagine with this, all of it has happened in real time, and we've been kind of, going with it on the fly. And so there's been a lot of different reiterations and thinking and evolution of our thinking on this. But most recently, and really led by Brendan on our team, we've landed on sort of our position on this, and we believe that an energy efficient economic recovery can happen in three steps. The first is in the really kind of I think we're still in this stage in Canada, but we're kind of exiting this stage right now. So during this crisis, the twin economic and health crisis that Canada and the world is facing, we believe it's an opportunity to prepare, plan, and train. We know that the energy efficiency workforce needs a lot more people. And we know that if energy efficiency is going to be central to economic recovery, we have an opportunity right now while we're still, physically distancing, while we are still, many people working from home, and while we're still, as our businesses may not be as busy as possible, an opportunity to train and plan for that immediate future. So we've been calling for an immediate investment in training from the federal government. They've already started that through some of the subsidies they've announced recently to training programs, but there's a lot more that we can be doing. in this space. We are working with other groups like the Canada Green Building Council, who's identified that this is a $500 million investment that's required in order to improve and expand the energy efficiency workforce. So that's the first step. The second step is in the stimulus phase. So we think that at some point, the federal government's going to be making some hard decisions about how Canada's economy is going to get back on track. With our partners like Clean Energy Canada, who have coined this term, not just shovel ready, but quote unquote shovel worthy program portfolios, we think there's an opportunity to scale up, double, triple, quadruple existing programs that are happening in every province around the country, and also thinking about upgrading our public sector buildings. We've been calling for an immediate investment of $2.2 billion for this, and then ramping up to an annual investment of over $11 billion. That's what the opportunity is. And if we want to get people back to work, we've got shovel-worthy and shovel-ready programs right off the bat. And some of those things are obviously going to be dependent on the priorities and the flexibility of each province. But some of those things include deeper energy retrofits that, provincial portfolios, which are, typically governed by regulators, may not be driving. It includes reducing energy poverty. We know there's a significant lack of investment in programs for low income across the country. Advancing building codes and zero carbon heating. So these are some of the areas that we believe that our provincial partners can start to really ramp up and scale up as part of a stimulus phase. Now, if we stop there, we would be cornering ourselves into a continuation of this kind of boom and bust, thing that we see, that has been around in energy efficiency for a long time. And we felt that if, stimulus spending is typically that, to stimulate economic activity. So if after 12, 18, or 24 months, stimulus money dries up, what we don't want to happen is the energy efficiency sector to contract again. So this goes into the third phase, and we've been thinking a lot about recovery and long-term sustained investments in energy efficiency, and really starting to think about treating buildings and retrofits and energy efficiency as part of Canada's infrastructure. And so we've been calling for essentially a public investment through a green bank, which is a model that's been used around the world, to give us kind of that long-term sustained investment strategy that really kind of combines the financing that is required with concierge style facilitation of programs and retrofit activity. So the goal for that is really to decarbonize all of our buildings by 2050, or if not sooner, to make all new buildings net zero energy ready by 2030, and to improve Canada's industrial energy efficiency in line with our partners in the US by 2040. So we believe that an initial capitalization of this is around the 11 billion mark. So if you think of these three steps, you've got your relief, you've got your stimulus, you've got your recovery, and they build on each other to make sure that this economic recovery is as energy efficient as possible. So what would this result in? So we've looked at our own macroeconomic analyses and some others, and started to think about the types of jobs this would create in economic activity. We know that in the first year of the stimulus work, that would net 35,000 jobs immediately, and that only ramps up year over year as we continue to scale up that investment. We also notice a $9 billion increase in GDP. So this is something, these are real numbers. We know that this can happen on the ground almost immediately. And we've been working with the provincial partners from all the provinces to make sure that they're ready to go should an investment and a policy signal be made. So we've taken this position, and we've taken these ideas, and we started to spread our message in Ottawa. Over the last 8 or 10 weeks, we've met with 4 federal ministers. We've had regular calls with Minister O'Regan's office, who is responsible or has the mandate for energy efficiency at Natural Resources Canada. We've met with the BC Minister of Energy and Mines and Petroleum Resources. We've met with NRCan's Deputy Minister and 4 ADMs. And we have regular, almost daily meetings with policy staff at NRCan, infrastructure, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, small business. And I would say that this message is starting to get through. I think that, we're speaking to many of you and many stakeholders across the country and relaying this message back into government in Ottawa. I believe that message is starting to work and to rest. So we're happy that we're able to kind of take the position that we've had, working with each of you, and spread that message into the right stakeholders. So now, as we turn away from kind of the research and policy analysis, I just want to kind of talk quickly a little bit about our communication work as well. So my colleague Lindsay Grossfield leads our communications efforts, and we've been very active in trying to tell this story as well. Brendan's been featured. Here's a snapshot of him on TVO The Agenda last week. He's also been featured on Global News Toronto. We've been mentioned and interviewed for CBC News, for Globe and Mail as well, and trying to get the message out as much as possible that energy efficiency is one of those ways that Canada can spur its economic recovery as we start to think about that when it happens. So in addition to that kind of traditional communications effort, we spend a lot of time on social media and through our digital advertising, our digital work, trying to spread this message as well. And many of you, I'm sure, are following all of our communications efforts throughout this period of time. The last area, and this is what I want to spend the most amount of time on because I do believe it is probably the most important thing we're doing right now, is our engagement work. And the first thing that occurred as part of this is we started to join other coalitions of groups that were starting to advocate for this. Again, our friends at Clean Energy Canada brought together as a loose group of leaders across the country under this banner of a Clean Stimulus Alliance. They launched a website, resilientrecovery.ca, which brought together folks in energy efficiency, renewables, electric vehicles, hydropower, clean tech, and started to weave a much broader narrative around economic recovery. And I will say that this, as we've had meetings with various different ministers, this narrative and the thread that knits all of these elements together has been very effective and very well received. So big shout out to Clean Energy Canada for bringing that coalition together. We were happy to be part of it. We're also tangentially involved in a brand new group that was launched last week, Recovery. This is a nonpartisan group that was pulled together recently to look at the various different proposals that are out there and start to kind of think about how to evaluate them and to provide information as to which are worthy of staying. Our coach, Meadowcroft from University, is one of the eminent Canadians who is appointed to this task force, and we've been dialoguing with him and his colleagues around the role that energy efficiency can play. The other thing that we've been doing, in addition to joining some coalitions, is we've really been building a broader coalition ourselves. I mentioned this earlier that 9 of the 10 provinces have joined us in announcing their readiness to be involved in energy efficiency and to be ready for when there's a longer term investment. We wrote a letter to a number of ministers signed by each of these parties, and the core message was one of readiness, that if the federal government was interested in adopting energy efficiency as part of its economic recovery, that you would have provincial partners on the ground ready to go, ready to scale up almost immediately. And there's existing programs that can be scaled up overnight. So these are the groups that we brought together as part of that coalition. And we've also been building a coalition with workers. And we have signed a letter with 5 trade associations, again, made up of small businesses who are the people behind home heating, insulation, windows, some of the activities that have been featured in federal government ministers' mandate letters, saying that they are ready to, that their members, mostly small businesses from across Canada, would be ready to scale up their efforts, hire up people, and get ready to go should the federal government send a signal. So that readiness is a big part of the coalition as well. And then we've been working with our provincial partners, regular dialogues with our friends at Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance and the Clean Foundation in Nova Scotia, and the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, a group of contractors and doing work in British Columbia, and trying to align the more of the provincial advocacy efforts with a national voice. Very effective as we've talked to people in Ottawa, and they see the and a common voice and a common message amongst provincial and federal players. And then the last thing we've been doing is direct mobilizing. And some of you have likely seen this, and hopefully all of you have signed this letter, but we have launched a mini campaign called EE Recovery. It's a one-click letter to send to your representatives to start to invest in energy efficiency right now for Canada's economic recovery. I believe we have almost 300 letters that have been sent directly to MPs across the country. And we've heard from MPs that this matters, that these letters mean that this is a real issue. It's especially poignant when small businesses and local constituencies write these letters and send them in and talk about them. We've been working with those trade associations to almost franchise this idea of this letter so that their members can see it. And then my colleague Kristen has been doing weekly webinars with people to coach people on how to have these kinds of meetings, what to say, how to tell your story, what it means to kind of have a Zoom call or a phone call with your elected official and kind of dispel some of the scariness out of it. So we're really trying to support the sector as much as possible to make it as easy as possible for them to tell their story and to advocate on energy efficiency's behalf. So what are we hearing in all these meetings? I've kind of framed it into four different things or trends or themes that we've been hearing over the last 8 or 10 weeks. Number one is we know that our work is informing the government's economic recovery response. We have heard this from multiple different departments and multiple different people. The pragmatic nature of energy efficiency and our style, our coalition building and making sure that we have as many people into the tent means a lot. And so this is working. We're not quite where it needs to be, but we're getting there and we're definitely in the conversation. Secondly, timing is still unknown. This is probably the number one question we get almost daily from everyone across the country is when are they going to make announcements and what's happening and when do you know when they're going to make decisions? We don't know, but we do know that evaluating some of the options has begun. And I think that we're kind of entering a new phase now where the majority of government for the last 8 or 10 weeks has been really focused on the emergency response, which, you know, if you think about it outside of the political sphere and just from a civil service perspective has been an incredible task for Canada's civil service to take care of Canadians. And attention in some departments is starting to focus on kind of this next phase. So we know that we don't know the exact timing of when this is going to happen, but we know this kind of evaluation phase is beginning. The third thing is, and I already mentioned this, but your stories matter, both in how you've been affected and in how you can be part of the recovery. We really need your stories to be told. So whichever way you feel comfortable telling that story, it does matter, especially when you talk about the impact that your business has had and the impact it could have as part of recovery. And then lastly, as I mentioned, that we have heard directly from MPs that elected officials want to hear from you. This is our democracy and they are listening. And so across the country, as you are a tax-paying individual or business in a constituency, your voice matters and especially matters now. And if you tell your story about how your organization has been impacted or how it would be positively impacted as part of these policy investments, then it really does make a difference. And we know that those stories and that MPs have, they can advance our agenda as much as possible. So we know that, we've heard that, and we want to do as much as we can to continue that. So I'm just going to end off on just a little bit of an inspirational note. You know, certainly we've been extremely inspired by what's been happening in other jurisdictions around the world, and it's given us some effort to double down our work. I do believe that the work we're all doing now, we have a moment in time right now where energy efficiency has never seen before in Canada. And I think that if we're strategic about this and if we put as much effort as we can into this, that we can see a huge window opening for Canada's energy efficiency sector, but not only that, but for our future of Canada's economy and obviously our contribution to climate change. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that are happening around the world to hopefully inspire you as well, that this is doable, that we can do this if we do it together. This is a picture of Fatih Birol. He's the executive director of the International Energy Agency. And from the beginning, the IEA has been extremely vocal, which is a little uncharacteristic of them, but I think they've taken a more activist stance as of late, especially as they are partnering more with the United Nations. But saying that putting clean energy at the heart of stimulus plans is a way to counter this coronavirus crisis. Fatih actually hosted a conference call with 15 countries, with the energy ministers of 15 countries. Our energy minister, Enercan Minister Regan, was on that call, and he spent 2 hours imploring every country to double down their efforts on clean energy, on energy efficiency. And I know that that call is starting to influence, the thinking around the world, because it does matter from an international perspective. So it's great to see that kind of activist standpoint. And here's Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, who's recently said it's clear that the Green New Deal is the way for us to go. South Korea is one of the, before this, one of the largest per capita emitters in the world. And they are looking at this as not only a way to go from climate villain to climate hero, but also to reboost and reignite their economy. And interestingly enough, about what's happening in South Korea, there is a woman named So-young Lee, who's a first-time member of parliament. She's 35 years old. 1 year ago, she was on the streets every Friday as part of Greta Thunberg's Fridays for the Future campaigns. And she got elected, and she is now leading the Green New Deal for South Korea at age 35. Inspiring to see that, and we know that energy efficiency is at the core of those kinds of plans as well. So it'll be really interesting to follow that. And then lastly, what's happening in Europe. This is by far the most ambitious plan the world's ever seen around climate. This was something that the European Union was entertaining as part of a Green New Deal many months ago. In fact, our colleagues in Europe were telling us back in February about the work being done. Now, interestingly enough, as the crisis hit, there was a lot of discussion around whether or not this would remain. And it looks like as of this week that this Green New Deal in the EU will continue. In fact, it will be stronger than ever. And I just want to say a few of the stats or the numbers of investment that the European Commission has put forward and voted on this week. 91 billion euros for energy efficiency and green heating, 25 billion euros for renewables, 20 billion euros for clean vehicles, 60 billion euros for zero emissions trains, and 1 million jobs. And this is happening right now. So it's really inspiring to see, and it's hard to defute the fact that if Europe is moving in this direction, that Canada is not paying attention to that. And I do believe that Canada is looking at leaders from around the world and thinking about where the future of the global economy is going, and has a huge opportunity now to follow in their footsteps and to match these kinds of commitments. And it's up to each and every one of us to make that happen. And I think, again, a moment in time right now where if we came together, we can kind of see those kinds of investments and the scale of investment in Canada as well. So I'm just going to end before Q&A just on what you can do. And this is the call to action that we're creating for each of you. Number one, send a letter to your MP. If you haven't done it yet, it takes 30 seconds. And sign up and let your MP know that this is important. This is a big part of Canada's economic recovery. Number two, think about how you could franchise the action. As I mentioned earlier, some of our friends at the trade associations at HRAI and SODAC, Fenestration Canada, they've put these letters on their own website and driving their members to it as well. It means a lot when it comes from your own association and your own sector being part of a much bigger coalition. So think about ways you could franchise the action as well. Thirdly is mobilize others. We know psychologically that people take action when their friends and their peers and their family members tell them about it. It's one thing if a voice like us says it, or an NGO says it, or if the government says it, but when friends tell friends and family members tell family members, psychologically there is much more action to be taken. We listen to our friends and our colleagues and our peers. So figure out your own way to mobilize your friends, your colleagues, your employees, your employer, to help raise awareness on this as well. And then lastly, connect with us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear how you can help on this recovery. We want to hear your organizing ways. We're open to working more and more with you, and we want this to be, as much as possible, a much bigger tent as it is now to kind of drive awareness around this. So I'm going to end there. As you can probably tell, we're quite passionate about this. This is what we do, and we can't do this without you. And so for those who have been along with us on the ride, thank you so much. For those who are just jumping on, there's lots of room on the ship. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Corey. I love the term that you used at Clean Energy Canada. I'm not sure if they're the ones that created it, but the shovel worthy versus just shovel ready. I think that's such an important distinction to be made right now. So let's open the floor for questions, and I'm just going to bring Brendan Haley in here. He's our Director of Policy to answer questions with Corey. First question here, again, just a reminder to people, there's a Q&A question box at the bottom of your screen, and you can vote with a thumbs up to bump them up the list. And then we also have, if you want to raise your hand, and I can unmute you as well. So that's another option for you. So the first question is from David Katz. How do we address the financing challenge as some energy users are uncertain about the new loads and needs are uncertain?
Sure. So yeah, I think what the question is getting at is that the market conditions that program administrators and people on the ground are going to face post-COVID is going to be very different than pre-COVID, and one of the issues I think is quite high levels of personal debt existed already, but are going to exist before. So even low-cost financing options might not seem that enticing or lucrative, perhaps, to people. So that's why we proposed the immediate stimulus should really focus on ramping up existing programs, and those programs can use a combination of both grants and loans, depending on how they engage with the customer. And we've suggested that that expansion of scale and scope of existing programs should focus on some things that are in addition to what some of the utility or other programs are doing right now. So that is deeper savings, essentially. So measures like windows, new heating systems that might not be pass, say, cost effectiveness tests in some jurisdictions could be ramped up with some extra federal money. Also low-income programs. So low-income programs, typically loans do not work very well for low-income populations. They are no cost to participants. But there's big stimulus benefits to low and moderate income energy efficiency because those populations are more likely to spend the money they save in the local economy. I guess the high level thing I'd say is that supporting a portfolio of projects is going to enhance that adaptability for whatever the market conditions are. I mean, we don't know if there's going to be a big demand from residential customers because they've been spending so much time in their house, or if there's big opportunities that we keep hearing about actually in empty commercial buildings and industrial operations. So I think it's important to propose a portfolio of projects that can be supported and programs that can be supported to allow that adaptability we're going to need in the uncertain market conditions coming forward with COVID, rather than say, one magic program that might face some disruptions, given we're not too sure where physical distancing measures and things like that are going to land.
Thanks, Brendan. I don't know, Corey, if you want to add anything to that, or we can just
keep going.
Go ahead the second. It was pretty well thought out there. So just I noticed that Cindy from the Canadian Association of Consulting Energy Advisors just wrote in the chat message. She's hoping that this presentation will be available afterwards. So I just wanted to mention to everyone while you're here that we're going to actually post this session, since it's us presenting. We're going to either post it on our YouTube or our website, and I can send everyone a link on Monday so that they have it. So thanks for your interest in that. A question from Lise Townsend is, what is the best way for local governments to support this call to action or provide input, etc.? So for local governments.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually had a call with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities yesterday. We've been dialoguing with them over the course of the last couple of months. They not only do they run programs and support municipalities on, through the Green Municipal Fund and green infrastructure, but they also take an advocacy stance. And together, we were successful in helping in the last budget way back in 2019, where over $1 billion was sent over to FCM to deliver on 3 important programs. So I will leave it to FCM to advance the the interest of local governments, but we have been dialoguing around what kinds of things we're each advocating for. So if you'd like a connection there, just reach out to us and we can connect you directly with the people at FCM that are developing those platforms. And then we will, as they start to align with the stuff we do, it would be great to have a bigger tent of municipal actors driving this as well. I will say on the other side of it, we're also thinking outside of, this regular immediate work. Our work continues on things like building codes and retrofit codes and equipment standards and things like that have a huge impact on municipalities. And we're starting to build much deeper ties and relationships with many municipalities on energy efficiency in general. And so there's an opportunity for cities to kind of plug into our work on that way.
Thanks, Corey. I have another question here on green banks from Sharon Body. Would the green bank you mentioned be a revolving type, for example, an initial endowment with savings reinvested? Or how do we see that working?
Do you want me to answer that again? Yes, I think most green banks, the idea is that you can actually make money from those investments, and that's one of the objectives is actually to demonstrate to the private sector that you can make money through these investments, and to try to crowd in that private sector interest. So yeah, I mean, some of the calculations we did, that I did, they're kind of back of the envelope. But if you look at take leverage rates of per public sector investment, how much private sector investment can be leveraged through co-financing options, but then if that is then you can securitize those investments and then sell them to something like a pension fund, and then you've got liquidity again, so that becomes recycled and that can be reinvested. So for instance, down in the States, they have a proposal to create a national climate bank, and they have numbers that they're suggesting for leverage and recycling, and we think an $11 billion initial capitalization would help us get to some of the estimates of the potential for big retrofit programs in the country. So yes, short answer yes. And just to clarify, I think there's existing institutions such as the Infrastructure Bank or perhaps Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation that could undertake these types of investment strategies.
Thanks, Brendan. I have a question here from Matthew Yarman. I know it. We can definitely speak to this one. The question is, can we try to get the Liberals to follow through on their election promise regarding energy efficiency? So the free home energy audits, money for retrofits, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, good question. So in our initial mobilizing before the budget, we were very active in promoting what was in the mandate letters to various different ministers, of which one of them was this program that you referenced. We have had a number of conversations in Ottawa about it. No decisions yet on if they're going to be moving ahead with that. Our colleagues at HRAI and SODAC and Fenestration Canada and others who have signed the letter, Kafka and NEMA, they are directly promoting that as an option, and so we're doing everything we can to promote those kinds of following through on the promises. I will say, though, that the fact that it is in the mandate letter definitely helps as the Canadian government's thinking about recovery. Certainly what they originally set out in their mandate after getting elected, if any of those programs or mandates can be applied to economic recovery, then you're obviously hitting two wins there. And so we've been making the case that anything related to energy efficiency, including those outlined in the mandate letter, are job creating, GDP boosting strategies.
Thanks, Corey. I have a question here from Rebecca from EcoFit. Have there been thoughts and conversations at federal or provincial levels around supporting future participants to ensure customer uptake occurs if money is invested? So residential and commercial customers will not have the money or time to invest in retrofits and will need more education and support than ever before.
Yeah, we have not got too much into program design of these types of programs. I think that, certainly provincial administrators and utilities this is consuming them right now, is how to get the participant rate back up in a time where people may not be investing much. And so we hope that if there's investment in those provincial programs, that either more funds are put towards grants or financing or incentives, and more money towards marketing outreach and education as well. But at this point, I think that would be up to the local administrators and utilities who are designing those programs, and we haven't been part of those kinds of conversations yet.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think, one of the reasons why federal support might be quite important for the next couple of years is because higher incentives, higher engagement is probably going to be necessary to save energy in a recessionary environment. I also think that a lot of the policy background to supporting some of the provincial programs right now comes from utility ratepayer funds. Those policy justifications are based on avoided costs and leveling load growth. That policy justification might not be as strong in a recessionary period, but the policy justifications for creating jobs, for helping people live in healthier homes, for stimulating the economy are quite a bit stronger, and that might have to come from different funding sources.
That kind of leads to another question here. I don't know if we'll have an answer, but we can have a reason why this is the case. So the question is, how can we get utilities across the country to run national programs like gas and electric that make programs more cost effective and easier to understand for customers' perspective? So I don't know if we want to touch on that one, really an explanation as to why things are the way they are.
I can try to touch on that one. I mean, there are examples of, so one of the areas we're suggesting that the federal government try to, support the provinces, but also meet some of their priorities are things like low carbon heating, which I think gets into some of those siloed areas. But there are examples of provinces that have run programs across utilities and have tried to break down those silos. One is I'm blanking on the name on it right now, but there was a program in Ontario, I think the Whole Home program, that actually, I was fairly successful, but didn't pass the cost effectiveness screening. So that is an example of a program that might be ready to go and under a different type of policy justification in terms of stimulus might be able to be ramped up already. And we could start to, I think, break down some of those silos. I mean, I think it's a toss-up between allowing provinces to develop programs and meet their context versus versus some of the drawbacks of a federal program that can be quite boom and bust and slow to deliver at this point.
Thanks for that. It was a tricky question because there's not really a set answer. A question here from Yasmin Abraham from Cambo. How will the efficacy of program/funding be positioned for this recovery? More money for programs that are not effective will not help. How will programs that are objectively more effective be promoted?
Do you want me to try that? I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the benefits of the provincial programs is that their evaluation protocols and some of their tracking systems, I would argue, are much stronger than federal government's. So we're suggesting that they can leverage that existing infrastructure. However, there should be different objectives associated with some of the stimulus program. In particular, job creation could be low-income specific objectives, multiplier effects, health benefits, a lot of the non-energy benefits that we talk about that are not typically measured in ratepayer-funded utility programs are actually what you're after, I think, in the context of stimulus. So I guess effective based on what metric and what objectives, and I think it's kind of exciting to think about how some of the federal government / stimulus recovery objectives could open us up to more innovative programming.
And Yasmin, just so you know too, we have been asked that question by some government officials who are, looking at past programs, like for example, the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which was mostly focused on cost per ton abated, and trying to think now that there's likely, given the economic situation, a much broader lens to evaluate it. So they are thinking of this, and it would be hopefully that we start to have a deeper engagement to start to understand how to evaluate specific kinds of investments so that they, match or expand upon, provincial objectives as well.
Thanks for that. I have, I'm just cautious of the time right now, so we have a few questions. One question I'm just going to get to is from Shaimal. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Shout out to Efficiency Canada team for doing a great job promoting this topic. Well done. They found the provincial scorecard published very useful. But the question is there a plan to perform similar exercise at cities and municipalities level? And what about building an efficiency scorecard for utilities across province / country?
Question right at Brendan Haley's heart. Perfect.
So we are doing the scorecard again this year, and it's quite an intensive exercise. And so look for it to come out again in the fall. There's no plans to do a municipal scorecard, but our friends at Quest, Quality Urban Energy Systems of Tomorrow, have actually also worked with the ACEEE in the States to learn from their municipal scorecard. And so theirs is not exactly a ranking like ours, but it does provide a benchmarking that municipalities can use. So I'd encourage you to check out Quest. A utility scorecard would also be very interesting. I think this year we're playing around with perhaps providing, at least for illustrative purposes, some better utility specific benchmarking and metrics. It would be very interesting to do, a full spectrum thing like they do in the States, but we don't currently have the funding or resources for that. But that would if there's a demand for it, we could try to see if we can make it happen in future years.
And also, if you want to put in a plug-in for your recent comparison, the North American comparison that you did too.
Oh, right. Yeah. So if you go to our blog space, actually, we have a comparison right now with some of the fuel-specific saving metrics from the provinces and the states, comparing the American scorecard to our Canadian scorecard. And we use that to emphasize the opportunity we have to catch up to some of the leading American states, and actually, just catching up to what is already being achieved in the States seems like a very practical area for economic stimulus and to support us into recovery.
I know I found that a really interesting piece because I talk to a lot of a lot of people in general, and you could ask anyone, and just ask them who they think is winning or doing better in energy efficiency, Canada or the US. And hands down, I would say almost everyone says Canada, but that's not necessarily the case. So here's a report that says exactly what it is. So it's nice to have some stats and behind that. So I'm just going to end there because we're short on time for now. So thank you, Brendan and Corey, for joining in this great discussion. A lot of thought-provoking questions there. A lot of things added to our to-do list, I think, as well. So great conversation on this, as always. As I always say, our voices are louder together. So please go to our website and send that letter to your elected official or give a call. And join me next Friday along with our guest speaker from Oracle's O-Power, who will share insights on their work on low-income programs. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy your Friday afternoon and have a great weekend.